If you've been trading in Bloxfruits, but your inventory somehow keeps getting worse instead of better, you might be making one of these 5 mistakes. Trading can seem simple at first. You find another player, look at their fruits, make an offer, and if they accept, you get what you wanted. But if you actually want to build your inventory and eventually reach better fruits, trading takes more than just accepting whatever looks like a good deal. You need to understand value. You need to understand demand. You need to know when you're overpaying. And most importantly, you need to know where each trade is taking your inventory. So in this video, I'm going through 5 trading mistakes that could be keeping you poor in Bloxfruits, and what you should do instead. Let's start with the first mistake. Mistake number 1 is only looking at value. This is one of the easiest mistakes to make when you're new to trading. You find a value list, look at the numbers, compare 2 fruits, and assume that the fruit with the higher number automatically makes the trade better. But trading isn't that simple. Imagine someone offers you a fruit that has a higher listed value than the fruit you're giving them. At first, it looks like an obvious win. You might think, I'm getting more value, so why wouldn't I accept? But there's another question you need to ask. How much demand does that fruit have? A fruit can have a high value on a trading list and still be difficult to trade if very few players actually want it. Meanwhile, another fruit might have slightly less value but much stronger demand. That can make the second fruit more useful for building your inventory. Think about what happens after you accept the trade. You now have this new fruit. You want to trade it again. But when you enter a trading server, nobody wants it. You keep making offers, but players decline. You advertise it, but nobody responds. Eventually, you realize that the higher value didn't help you very much because you can't easily turn that fruit into something else. This is why you should think beyond the number. Value is important, but it isn't the only thing that matters. Imagine someone offers you a fruit that has a higher listed value than the fruit you're giving them. At first, it looks like an obvious win. You might think, I'm getting more value, so why wouldn't I accept? But there's another question you need to ask. How much demand does that fruit have? A fruit can have a high value on a trading list and still be difficult to trade if very few players actually want it. Meanwhile, another fruit might have slightly less value but much stronger demand. That can make the second fruit more useful for building your inventory. Think about what happens after you accept the trade. You now have this new fruit. You want to trade it again. But when you enter a trading server, nobody wants it. You keep making offers, but players decline. You advertise it, but nobody responds. Eventually, you realize that the higher value didn't help you very much because you can't easily turn that fruit into something else. This is why you should think beyond the number. Value is important, but it isn't the only thing that matters. You should also ask yourself how easy the fruit will be to trade. If a fruit has strong demand, you may have more opportunities to use it in future trades. That means you can potentially turn one trade into another trade, and then another. This is especially important if you're trying to work your way toward a specific goal. For example, let's say your goal is to eventually get a very valuable fruit. You don't necessarily need to jump directly from your current inventory to that fruit. Instead, you can gradually improve your inventory through multiple trades. But if you accept something that is difficult to trade, you can get stuck. You might technically have more value, but you don't have the flexibility to continue trading. So before accepting a trade, don't just ask, is this worth more? Ask, is this something other players actually want? And then ask, will this help me with my next trade? Those questions can prevent you from getting stuck with fruits that look good on paper but aren't useful in an actual trading server. And that's only the first mistake. The next mistake is something that can make an otherwise good-looking trade much worse. Let's move on to number 2. Mistake number 2 is ignoring demand. This is connected to the first mistake, but it's important enough to talk about separately. Value tells you what something is considered worth. Demand tells you how much players actually want it. And when you're trading with real players, demand matters because players decide whether they want to accept your offer. Imagine you have 2 fruits. The first fruit has a higher listed value, but only a small number of players are interested in it. The second fruit has a slightly lower value, but many players are actively looking for it. Which one would be easier to trade? In many situations, the second fruit. That's because you have more potential traders. If 10 people want something, you have many more opportunities than if only one person wants it. This is why you should pay attention to what people are actually looking for in trading servers. Don't just look at a value list. Look at the messages players are sending. Look at the fruits people are asking for. Look at which fruits are receiving multiple offers. And pay attention to what players are willing to give for certain fruits. Demand can also change. A fruit that is popular at one point might become less popular later. Another fruit might become more desirable because of changes in the game or because player preferences change. So don't assume that one value list tells you everything you need to know. Use value as a reference, but also pay attention to the actual market. One useful question to ask yourself is, if I get this fruit, how quickly can I trade it again? If you already know that many players want it, that's a good sign. If you have trouble finding anyone interested in it, you should be more careful. This also helps you avoid getting trapped in your inventory. You don't want to collect fruits that you can't move. The best trading inventory isn't necessarily the inventory with the biggest numbers. It's an inventory that gives you options. You want fruits that other players recognize, want, and are willing to trade for. That way, when you enter a server, you have more opportunities to make your next trade. The more opportunities you have, the easier it becomes to work toward your goal. But demand isn't the only thing you need to watch. Mistake number 3 is adding too much just to force a trade. This happens when you really want another player's fruit. You make an offer. They decline. So you add something. They decline again. You add another fruit. Then another. Eventually, your original offer has turned into a huge overpay. The problem is that you're no longer making decisions based on whether the trade is actually good. You're making decisions based on the fact that you really want the other player's fruit. That can be dangerous. Let's say you're trying to get a specific fruit. You offer several fruits from your inventory. The other player declines. Instead of looking for another trader, you keep adding more because you think you're almost there. Eventually, they accept. You might feel like you finally reached your goal. But then you look at what you gave away. You realize that you gave away several useful fruits just to get one fruit. Now your inventory is much smaller. You may have reached your short-term goal, but you've made it much harder to continue trading afterward. This is why you shouldn't let one trade become more important than your entire inventory. If someone rejects a reasonable offer, you can simply move on. They might want different fruits. They might already own what you're offering. They might be looking for an overpay. Or they might simply not be interested. A rejection doesn't automatically mean you need to add more. There are other players. There are other trading servers. And there will be other opportunities. One of the best habits you can develop is knowing when to walk away. Before adding another fruit, stop and ask yourself, if I didn't want their fruit so badly, would I still make this offer? If the answer is no, that's a warning sign. You're probably adding because of emotion rather than because the trade makes sense. Sometimes the best trade is the one you don't make. You can keep your inventory, find another player, and wait for a better opportunity. Now let's look at the opposite problem. Mistake number 4 is rejecting every small win. Some players expect every trade to be a massive upgrade. They want to give one fruit and receive several much more valuable fruits in return. But trades like that aren't always going to happen. If you're constantly waiting for a massive overpay, you might miss smaller opportunities that could help you build your inventory. Let's say you have a fruit that isn't particularly easy to trade. Someone offers you another fruit that has slightly better demand. The value difference might not be huge. You might think, that's barely a win. I'm going to decline. But before you do that, think about what happens after the trade. If the fruit you're receiving is easier to trade, you may have more options in your next trade. You could potentially trade that fruit for something even better. Then you can repeat the process. You don't always need one enormous trade. You can make several smaller improvements. That doesn't mean you should accept every small upgrade. You still need to be careful. A small increase in value isn't necessarily worth it if the new fruit is extremely difficult to trade. Instead, ask yourself 3 questions. Is my inventory improving? Is the fruit I'm receiving useful? And will this give me better opportunities in future trades? If the answer to those questions is yes, the trade may be worth considering. Trading is about making progress. You don't need every trade to be your biggest win. You just need to make sure you're moving in the right direction. And now we get to the 5th mistake. Mistake number 5 is having no trading goal. Without a goal, it's very easy to start trading randomly. You see a fruit you like, so you trade for it. Then you see another fruit, so you trade that one away. Eventually, you've made a lot of trades, but you aren't actually any closer to what you wanted. Instead, decide what you're trying to get before you start trading. Maybe your goal is Buddha. Maybe you're trying to get Portal. Maybe you're working towards Spirit. Maybe you want Leopard. Or maybe your long-term goal is Kitsune. Once you have a goal, every trade becomes easier to judge. Ask yourself, does this trade help me get closer to my goal? If it does, consider it. If it doesn't, you don't have to accept it. You can wait. The most important thing to remember is that trading isn't just about getting a fruit that looks better. It's about building an inventory that you can continue improving. Think about the trade you're making now, but also think about the trade you want to make after it. A good trader isn't just someone who gets a good trade once. A good trader is someone who can consistently make decisions that improve their inventory. If this video helped you understand Bloxfruits trading better, consider subscribing for more Bloxfruits tips, guides, and trading strategies. And if you're currently working toward a specific fruit, keep that goal in mind with every trade you make. Your next trade could be the one that moves your inventory to the next level.